All right, hi everybody. Thanks for sticking around for the late Sunday talks. I know not a lot of people do, so we appreciate it. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is what to expect when you're expecting a pen test. First of all, who here in the room is a pen tester? Who works on the defensive?
Who has no fucking clue what they're doing?
Who works at Pizza Hut?
Who's an ice cream scooper? Manager of an ice cream shop.
Awesome. So first of all, I want to say thanks a lot to all the DerbyCon staff. Had a great time here. I want to thank them for having me, even though they didn't have a choice, but whatever. All right, so my name is Martin Boss. I'm a penetration tester. I work on the Kali Linux project. I work on DerbyCon. I'm not a CISSP, and then down here is my little Twitter handle if you want to follow me on Twitter for some antics.
I'm Eric Milam. You guys might know me as Bravo Hacks, some of you. Also involved with Kali Linux. I'm not really a pen tester anymore. Unfortunately, I'm management. So I have my CISSP, so now I actually get to use it, right? So, and then Bravo Hacks at the bottom there, too.
So we got a little disclaimer here in the beginning. If anybody's an attrition fanboy, we did not cite any of our fucking pictures in this talk.
We stole everything.
And Laszlo's dead.
Oh, and one other disclaimer is that we do cuss a lot. So if you are one of our customers, we apologize up front. We're a lot more professional when we're actually on site. We promise.
Some of us are. Cool. So what are we going to talk about today? Here's sort of our agenda that we want to refer to. We're going to talk about penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, risk assessments, kind of what the difference is. A lot of people have different opinions on what's what. So that covers the who, what, where, when, why, and how. We're going to talk about high impact vulnerabilities. Has anybody ever heard of those?
Anybody got the HIV out there?
Right. Got a couple of HIV patients in the house.
Right.
We're going to talk about cyber hygiene. Kind of a new thing. We're going to talk about security maturity, and we're going to talk about risk appetite, and we're going to talk about some thought leaders. There may even be some thought leaders in this room.
Yeah, cyber thought leaders even. Thought I saw a cloud thought leader up there too.
All right, so this is kind of our version of what we think security today looks like. Does this look familiar to anybody that works in a blue team environment? Is this kind of what your organization looks like?
Holy shit, the sky is falling.
So a lot of times we go into organizations and this is what we find, right? They don't really have a plan. They haven't had a proper test. They don't know how to strategize their security program. And
they don't even know what a proper test is.
Exactly. They don't even know what they're getting in a penetration test. And so what you get here is throwing a lot of money at the problem, a train wreck, and then ultimately a nuclear explosion when something like Heartbleed happens, or what's the newest?
Well, so this is a guy who found shell shock, everybody. I just want to let you know
what?
That.
Yeah. You got to do that.
Okay. So, of course, you, sir, you need to get a pen test, right? I'd love to be in all the boardrooms where they're like, hey, auditor says we need a pen test. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, I don't know, but this guy can do it for $500. So, ultimately what we're saying is you got to know what you're getting, right? What is a pen test? What does that really mean? And that's really what this talk is going to focus on, right? You got the douchebag up there with his slick glasses, and then your target dog, right?
And so this is the sleazy sales guy, right? So what happens is a penetration test sounds sexy, right? It sounds cool.
Red team,
like all those kind of terms sound really great. And so that's what salespeople are out there selling, unfortunately. And I'm not talking about every organization, but I'm talking about our personal experience with our organization and others. We're not just picking on everybody else. Where a salesperson goes into an organization and says, you don't want to be the next target, do you? You got to get a penetration test. Well, these people have never had any kind of third-party testing whatsoever. So they're going from A all the way to M without doing A, B, and C, and they're doing it because somebody is telling them that this is what they need.
Right. I read it in CIO magazine. We need to get one of these.
So that takes us into the next thing that we want to talk about is defining some terms. We want to make sure that everybody understands our terms regarding some of these things. They're not fact. They're not on Wikipedia. They're not. These are just some of the terms that we like. We didn't make them up either. These are just some of the terms that we like to describe this kind of stuff.
Right. So a penetration test is basically, what we're looking at as a penetration test is not just the vulnerabilities that exist, not the things that the scanner finds. We're looking at what can we actually do, and the value to the customer is how far we can take this. Can we get to the PHI or the cardholder data environment or whatever it is? It's really taking that next step of not only finding the vulnerability, but also exploiting the vulnerability and moving it forward to show what someone with true malicious intent can do within the organization with the limited amount of data that they have.
And so what's interesting regarding the penetration test, and we get this a lot, is we come into an organization and we find our one way in, and we use that way in, and then we escalate through the network and get, domain admin or PAI or whatever, and then we write the report and we're outlining how we did all this stuff. And our clients talk about, well, what about, like all of the other vulnerabilities on their network? The last time we ran a scanner, it said we had 40 million vulnerabilities or something like that. And where are those in this report? And we say, well, that's not a penetration test, right? That's what we like to refer to as a vulnerability assessment. Yeah, great segue. So that takes us into what a vulnerability assessment is, right? A vulnerability assessment is designed to look at the entire network, and that's where automated scanners come from. I use them. Who uses an automated vulnerability scanner? Anybody that gets up here and says that they don't is lying. They save a lot of time, and a lot of times, even when we're on our penetration test, we'll run a vulnerability scanner at the end of the engagement to help our clients see the overall picture of their environment. But it's not to be mistaken with a pen test, right? It's also not to be mistaken with people that run a vulnerability scanner and then run their pen test off of the results of the vulnerability scanner. That's also not penetration testing. That's what we like to call manually verifying vulnerabilities after they've been found with a scanner.
Right. So the way our methodology is, and I'll just speak for me and Martin because I hope it's Accuvant's methodology, but it might not be. But basically, we like to test in two different ways, right? The first day or so should be completely passive, no, vuln scanner, no anything like that. And what we're hoping to provide to the customer is, if you can catch me attacking you like an attacker, then you're in much better shape. Because once I fire up the vuln scanner, fucking every bell and whistle in the organization should be going off. And if there's nothing going off, then of course that's horrible. But if we can show you that we're attacking you like this, and we can help you, get your SIMs set up properly or get really actionable results out of what we were able to do passively, that's going to add, in my opinion, more value to the customer than just somebody coming in running a vuln scan.
So that brings us into the next facet of testing that's available. And so this happens a lot of times after we do a report when our clients are like, all right, well, what's my risk, right? And so as pen testers, like I hate the word risk because I'm like a 1 or a 0 kind of guy, right? It's either broke or it's not broke. It's either on or it's off, right? And so when I'm looking at a vulnerability, it's vulnerable, and I don't operate in the way where like, well, on a 1 to 5 risk level, that's like a 4. So but we got special guys for that, right? Obviously, companies don't have unlimited budgets and they can't fix everything, so they need to look at their risk appetite, which we'll cover later. And so this is a totally different type of testing, basically, where there's not a lot of technical stuff done, where a group comes in and they take a look at the vulnerabilities and they help the customer prioritize those vulnerabilities and decide what they can afford to fix on what timetable with what amount of people. And it's an important process, right? I mean, it really is. All of these, and that's what I want to say, is that all of these steps of testing are equally important in the organization. They just have to be done in the correct order. And so what happens is a lot of these other facets of testing that are very sexy, like a risk assessment, it's not sexy, right? Now that's fucking sexy right there. A risk assessment is not sexy, right? So nobody wants to do it because a penetration test is sexy. Yeah,
and we tell our guys, a pen test is a pen test is a pen test. We don't we look at severities, we don't look at risk, because me as a pen tester who's on site for a week, it would be complete hubris to think I understand what I found and what that true risk is to your organization. You probably, as an organization, have an entire risk department set up to decide that. But we test and we show what we're able to accomplish with that. We give it the severity. And we've had plenty of, what do you call it, arguments or conversations?
Arguments.
But discussions with customers, who want us to change our severity because they don't think that's the risk. And we say, based on what we're able to accomplish, this is a severity. And we have those, of course, outlined as to why, and we explain it. But severity and risk should be two completely different things for the organization.
And so there's one other type of testing that we see out there a lot in the world.
Woo!
And, everybody likes to harp.
PCI.
Everybody likes to harp on testing driven by compliance, PCI testing and people checking the box and saying, PCI is not security, and all of that is true. However, a lot of times we go into organizations that have never done any type of security testing whatsoever. They may run the free version of Nessus, every now and then or whatever, but they don't know where to begin. And so, something that I do think is important is that PCI and HIPAA and some of those other baseline standards can be used as a place for organizations to start. Obviously they're not security and there's all kinds of stuff you want to do after, but they can be important because it gives you a baseline guideline to get started somewhere. So while we don't like testing for compliance, in some cases it can be useful.
And it's better than doing nothing, right? I think we can all agree that at least it gets eyes focused in the right direction for an organization.
All right, so we're going to talk about how do I know that I need a pen test, and what are the signs and indicators that I'm ready for a pen test? The first one is we got to stop using stuff like this. I stole this slide from Dave a long time ago. I've been using it ever since. Fucking awesome. So anyway, this is crazy. And I go into a lot of organizations where they got some kind of formula like this that they're determining their risk level with. And they're not taking any of the environment variables into account. They're not taking what we can do during a pen test into account. They're just creating a formula, determining their budget, and figuring out, what their risk level is going to be. And what that really means in a formula like this is, how much, bad stuff can happen to me before my boss gets mad at me at the end of the year. And so this is a terrible way to start doing testing. And so organizations that are utilizing a model like this would greatly benefit by some testing by compliance to get started with, right?
So you have to think about too, right? What are you actually looking to protect? I know a lot of pen testers, I got domain admin, this, that, and the other thing. But what we really need to know as pen testers and what would help the organization is, what is your sensitive data? If you're Coca-Cola, it's the secret formula, right? Or Wendy's hamburgers or whatever it is. What are you trying to protect and what are you doing to protect that? And it's our goal through a penetration test or through any type of testing to show how easy it is or how difficult it is to access that type of information within the organization.
So I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an organization and I've said, can you list the top 5 things that make you money? What are the top 5? And they can't tell me. They can't always tell me what it is. And what's even more important is sometimes I don't even know as a penetration tester. A perfect example, I was working at an oil and gas company recently, and I was doing a pen test, and I got into the database, and I thought it was really great, and I got all the customer names and the credit card numbers, the payroll, or not the payroll, but the PO receipts, and I was I was all skipping along. I was I got the data, and I presented it to the client, and I said, look, I found all of your critical data, and they said, well, we don't really care about that, and I was all wait, what? And they said, I was well, what's important to you? And they said that the most important thing in their organization was the CAD drawings of the land they were surveying to drill for new oil. That never occurred to me, right? I never even thought about looking for that stuff. So that's an example of an organization that knew what they were trying to protect. But So this is where a risk assessment comes in. So if you're sitting around wondering, like, I wonder what my organization uses to make money, you're not ready for a penetration test, right? You need a vulnerability and a risk assessment so that you can determine where the data is, how critical it is, how valuable it is, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that question should lead you all the way back to host discovery. What do I have? What's open on those hosts? Where are they at? You know, where do I currently stand with them?
All right, so I want to talk a little, this is where we're going to talk about the easy wins, right? So time and time again, we go into an organization and we find something that could be found by a vulnerability scanner is what I like to call an easy win. If Nessus or Nexpose or what's that stupid one called? Shavlik?
No comment.
Sorry. Anyway, so if one of those vulnerability scanners can find it, there's absolutely no excuse for me to own you during a penetration test with that vulnerability. And if I do, you're wasting your money, right? It's like burning it up, because if I can come in and I can run Nessus and I can find Apache or whatever, we're going to talk about some of those, and compromise the organization, you should have gone back to step one, which is a vulnerability assessment. So before any kind of penetration test is done, you should have a program in place that allows you to fix low-hanging fruit.
You got to fix the low-hanging fruit first, right? Like Martin was talking about. I mean, how many times have we seen this, right? MS 08067, it does still exist. It's out there. We as pen testers, we're being brought in to pen test your network. We're not coming in to validate vulnerabilities that exist within your network, as Martin was saying, with regards to things that should have already been done. You are wasting your money on us to come in and do that for you.
This vulnerability is so famous, we're having fucking birthdays for it.
And then there's always this, which is the default passwords, right? Admin, I love on Tomcat servers. JBoss, unprotected JMX console. Oh, I skipped ahead, huh?
You did.
I mean, admin password works on like
a
ton of places. I'm sorry. Tomcat, upload your WAR file. Hey, look, it's a Windows box. I'm system. Okay, upload WC, dump the clear text creds, and you probably got a server admin, if not a domain admin or some service.
So Tomcat and JBoss are like our favorite,
and
right?
Access to
our
anything where we
favorite, because people have gotten to where they're finally fixing the Tomcat default passwords, but they're still not protecting the servlet consoles because it's not rated very high on a vulnerability scanner, right? They don't realize that you can upload a WAR file and take full control. And what's crazy to me is that all of the stuff that a vulnerability scanner says is critical, that's nonsense, like SSL v2, this is for some reason not. But whatever.
Yeah, and it's funny too. So one of the conversations we always have when the customer says we don't want any exploitation, right? I don't want to argue what it is, but I always tell them, okay, but if I find, and I always use Tomcat, if I find a Tomcat that I can log into and I can upload and deploy a WAR file, I don't consider that an exploit because I'm using it in the way the system's expecting to be used. Mr. Customer, do you agree? Yeah, that's fine, no problem. So that's why these things, they don't get as much love until someone like us come in and take advantage of it. But, I mean, how hard is it to set a strong password to protect the servlet?
Here's another all-time favorite. Anybody got Cold Fusion on their network still? I'm pretty sure every version of Cold Fusion since like 6 has like a critical vulnerability.
For the video, he said, thanks for resurfacing my nightmare.
Yeah, we still see this all over the place, even externally sometimes.
He's all choked up over it.
That's right. Another interesting thing is deployment misconfigurations. We take advantage of this type of stuff all the time. And a lot of times it's a simple radio button in group policy. It's something really, really simple. So like in this case, does anybody use Responder? Responder? So Responder does poisoning over a couple of different protocols. NetBIOS is a little bit harder to fix. However, a lot of times it uses LLMNR. It's hard to say. Poisoning or whatever. It's so fucking simple to fix it. You just disable it and you're done. But no.
And there's also, I mean, there's a checkbox for turning off the broadcast over TCP for NetBIOS, which is an easy fix. So another one that we like to recommend is, and I'm not going to say this is a fix for pass to hash, but this is definitely a setting that you should look at, is Preventing local accounts, local administrator accounts, or any local account on a box from logging in over the network, it's a group policy object. You just put them in there. And then now they can't log in over SIFs. So it's a huge one we always find, right? How many times do you guys find like a password, you just, PS exec or SMB exec or whatever, done.
So if you don't, this goes back to like if you don't have proper blue teamers, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you don't have people that know how to look for this type of stuff, then you need to up your game in your organization, and you're definitely not ready for a penetration test.
All right. And of course, I mean, we laugh about it or whatever, but patching is important, right? We got the Microsoft Tuesday, Linux, gives you all the great free stuff. Mac will let you pay them to protect your notebook for you. But patching is an important part, staying on top of what it is, having people who can actually research the things that come in and understand not just what it's doing, but what that will affect in your environment, right? And being able to separate out the ones and knowledgeably say, this is really going to impact us. We need to get on this and we need to make it happen no matter what. And being able to make calls to say, you know what, this is something that has to be patched outside of the, our standard patching window or whatever it is. It's something that goes largely unnoticed within an organization. It's like, sorry, well, we don't patch till Saturdays, but it's because a lot of times the people don't understand exactly what it is, what it means, and how it will affect the organization. So.
And patching, for God's sakes, does not just mean Windows, right? Everything requires a patch. And I know that everybody knows that, and it sounds funny, but I can't tell you how many times we've gone in and done sort of, a high-level architecture type review, and I've said, explain your patching process. And they say, we got SCCM, and we use it every Tuesday. Bam, we're good. And I'm all like, oh, what about the Linux boxes? We have Linux? Or, or what about Cisco? Or what about, whatever. And there's no processes in place for any of those systems. Or they're using some, this was quite a while ago, but me and Eric did a test where they told us that their Linux boxes were all the way up to date, and then they told us the tool, I'm not going to call...
Spacewalk?
I wasn't going to call it out.
Spacewalk.
Whatever. Anyway, the tool was open source and full of vulnerabilities. We were able to compromise the actual patching tool, which is ridiculous. So anyway, but so, having an organization, in place that understands patching on all of the different levels.
And one of the top three, things that do come out of a report is third-party patching. It's almost network segmentation, third-party patching are almost in every single report we write because it covers Apache and PHP and all those things that no one ever thinks about or no one understands that they even have on their network.
And there's usually not a process in place, and nobody's going to admit this, so I'm just going to call it out, but talk about Heartbleed, right? It was essentially like a third-party patch, right? And so basically, I saw companies falling all over themselves to patch Heartbleed because they did not have a process in place to patch those third-party things. And so that's why it became such a disaster in some organizations. And, of course, we're still finding it. I'm sure we will forever, but patching is really important, and so I like to stress and reiterate to people that if you're not doing this, you're probably not ready for a penetration test.
And Heartbleed's another perfect example of having people know what something does, because we had a lot of customers say, could you test this for us? And we're like, here's the POC, you can do it yourself. We'd like to take your $10,000, but let's be honest, we want to be good guys here. And they're like, we don't know how to run this. We don't know what you're talking about. Python, I don't know what that is, right? So...
Buying a vulnerability scanner. I freaking love vulnerability scanners because anything that can do work for me is awesome. So the reason that I say this is because we already touched on this a little bit, but if I come into your organization and own you because of something that should have been found by a vulnerability scanner, you are wasting your money paying me, because these things have gotten so cheap lately. Back in the day, like when some of them were $5-10 grand, or some bullshit yearly license or whatever, I understood a lot of smaller companies couldn't get them. However, Nessus is like $1,200 for God's sakes. What company can't afford that? And so anytime I go somewhere and they're not doing vulnerability scanning, I'm like, back up. We got to go all the way back and start to implement a vulnerability management program. Is that sexy? No. But do I recommend it? Yes. And do I help them do it? Yes. Because then the next time that they engage us, they're going to be a little bit more ready. already, and they won't be wasting their money as much.
I would rather spend a month sitting at a client scanning every subnet I find for them. I think there's more value in that than having me just come in and pop boxes and give them a report. It just makes so much more sense because no one knows what's on the wire, what services are running, and if you don't even know that, I mean, like you said, it's just a waste of time and money for your organization.
Yeah, so that brings us to a new term, cyber hygiene. Look for this on CNN.
This came out of this thought leader right here.
It's going to be getting big soon. And I know it sounds funny, but unfortunately, like it's kind of true, right? Like we have to clean our organization like multiple times, and we have to keep it clean. There's no use in coming in and doing a vulnerability and a risk and a pen test and all this stuff, like one time a year, and then letting it all fall apart the rest of the year, and then we come back in and do it again the other time. And so, kind of like Eric said, like I would much rather help a company implement a program that does these things than just come in and destroy them from a pen test. So like I would rather come in and say, are you scanning? Let me help you start scanning and show you how to digest the results, right? Something that we think is really important about vulnerability scanners is that a lot of times companies buy them and they have no idea how to digest the results and utilize them, and they don't understand that the ratings in all vulnerability scanners are like off the wall, right? And they have to be, and so that's where we come in, where we can say, look, I know it says this is high, but we're not openly exploiting this in the wild currently, and we haven't seen an exploit for it since 2005 or something, or something like that. And then we can say, oh, this is grossly underrated. Tomcat, we can own your entire system this way. So, and that takes it into remediation, right? Helping them remediate their vulnerabilities. Scanning doesn't do any good unless you have a program to remediate. Then you want to retest, right? Re-vulnerability scan. You don't just do it once. You keep doing it over and over again. And then another thing that we try to do, in organizations is either sanctions or rewards for people that, report things like phishing attacks, like all of that kind of stuff. The stuff that falls outside of the scope of, what we're doing on the technical control front. And then also coming in and having third parties do the testing. Does anybody trust their own security organization to do their pen test?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the thing is, how many defenders are out there again? So show me a show of hands real quick. How many times have you said this is an issue, no one's listened to you, and then pen testers come in and they say the same thing and then they listen to them? Is that pretty standard? Doesn't that totally suck? We feel bad as testers as well, right, for that. So please don't get mad at us. But we need to make sure that, when we go out there, we're educating the people that we're working with, and not the blue teamers. I'm talking about the management, to understand that these people were right. You should listen to them, right? Let them do what they need to do. They want to help you and protect your organization.
Cyber hygiene, you heard it here first. Just want to make that known.
Can I tell the story?
You can.
All right, so risk appetite. We fucking hate this concept. Well, we like it, but the way it came about. So Martin and I were at a con, and we were having lunch. Yeah. You were trying to have lunch. And a gentleman said, basically, I don't have pen tests. I don't want pen tests because I don't want to stay up late at night. And we're like, what are you talking about? Like, it doesn't magically go away just because you don't know about it, right? And he's like, well, I just don't want to do it. I don't have the risk appetite for what's going to come out of it. And that's the first time I'd ever heard it. But it ended up causing Martin to kind of throw his plate down and walk out. And I tried to talk reason to this guy, but I was also like, yeah, okay, I get it. So, but it's something that's come up, right? We get that customers have a limited amount of what they're willing to do. A lot of times when customers tell us, well, we don't want you to exploit, it's because somebody did something stupid before, or we want you scanning only at night, right? Somebody tipped something over. But it's understanding us, helping them understand what we do about it, how we're going to go about it, what our methodology is, what the expected outcome is, and working with them and educating them can help increase that risk appetite for the organization, because there's definitely a lot of things that we could prove with a proof of concept. But again, going back to showing how far can we go with this and how it actually affects your organization. There's lots of times where someone tells me, well, if you find an exploit, I don't want you to exploit it. And I just basically tell them, all right, well, if I find something like Tomcat or admin, I'm just going to call it a critical on the report if you're comfortable with that. It's not really a fair assessment because maybe that system's not really even joined to the domain or there's nothing on there. But since they're not letting me go that far because of their risk appetite, we can't truly show them what that severity is to the organization.
All right, so let's talk about some other things that need to be done before coming into pen test. Monitoring. Who monitors in their organization? All right. Who thinks that their monitoring is effective in their organization?
Let the record show that one person raised their hand.
And he's not very trustworthy,
yeah.
So. So tell me this, Mr. Monitoring in their organization. Do you monitor for successful logins on port 445 with the same account multiple times?
A service account that hasn't been changed in 10 years?
Because a pen tester would never do that, would they? Anyway, so monitoring, right? Something that's really, really, really important is monitoring an organization. And I know that's been said all of the time, but it's an effective monitoring process and testing it too. And so Dave was just talking about this over in his talk. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into somewhere and they've said, we got ArcSight and we paid like so-and-so, like however many dollars.
$5 million.
$5 million. And they came in and they wrote rules for 3 weeks. And, like those guys used to be on like, on some pen test team in like 1999. So they know what's up or whatever, and all this stuff.
Members at 2,600, I think.
And then we go in there and we create a domain admin account and we, kick our feet back and we wait for them to, to bum rush us, right? Because they saw it. But, like 3 days later, like, we're like, well, where are they at, right? Like, and so what happens is like the monitoring was broken. The monitoring was misconfigured. A perfect example is, and on a pen test, we usually don't create DA accounts. However, it's really helpful to customers to prove a lot of times that they're not monitoring, right? It's not a very stealthy thing to do. However, we like to do it a lot of times just to see if a customer is monitoring. And so a story about that, I was recently at, and they're a security company too, which is interesting. And so they were monitoring with something or other, and they were monitoring on Windows event codes. And so they had gotten the Windows event code for creating a domain admin account with incognito because they thought that that's how attackers would be doing it with the Metasploits and Meterpreter and all that stuff, right? So that's the event. What they didn't do was test all of the different ways to create a domain admin account legitimately and illegitimately and realize that there's 5 different event codes. So they were only monitoring for one of them. So what I did was just connected a Windows shell and, net user add, blah, 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 blah. And they never saw my domain admin account because they weren't monitoring on legit creations. So that's like a perfect example of where some monitoring was in place, but it failed. However, what happened was bringing in a third-party pen testing company uncovered that kind of stuff.
And just one other thing to add, I asked this in my last talk, is how many of you guys would actually know if one of your domain admins wrote? Does anybody, right? Because the person's doing what they're supposed to be doing with an account they're supposed to be using. How do you monitor for that, right? Those are important things that we need to figure out because good people do bad things.
And I'll talk about how to get some of that knowledge in a minute. Password policies. I love passwords. Anybody that knows me, so does Eric. We like passwords. So who's got a password policy in their organization? Whose password policy is the default Windows 8 characters?
With the 3.
Oh, are fucking
How many
lying.
have different policies for their elevated user accounts? Nice.
How many people test to see if the hash for an admin account and a regular account match?
Awesome. That's about standard, yeah.
So password policies are really tricky, right? Because it's really difficult to enforce a password policy in an organization as the security person. You would love to implement, and I've never met a security person that did not want to implement some ridiculous password policy, right? Like 15 characters or something like that. However, the fact of the matter is that security dudes are pretty low on the totem pole in a lot of organizations. So like, your request isn't going to get very far because the CEO is going to be like, hell no, I'm not remembering that because I got to type it in my shiny new iPad every time I get one, and I'm not going to do that. So, however, it does matter, right? Password policies matter a whole lot. And so I can't tell you how many times we got in an organization because of a weak password policy. And so when I go into an organization for a pen test and we talk about the password policy, if it's not up to par, generally, I mean, no lie, 9 times out of 10 when we go places, they're using the default Windows policy, 8 characters with complexity turned on.
No, I'm not taking the naked picture. The naked lady picture. That's all you.
Another thing that's really important is to know your adversaries, right? So when you're getting a third-party penetration test, you should be simulating your adversaries. So are they hacktivists? Are they like, Chinese dudes trying to get your money? Or are they, how are we going to simulate the attack against you to best represent the way that your adversaries are going to attack you? There you go.
So the next one that we were talking about earlier, one of the top 3 things, this is probably number 1, it's on every single one, is network segmentation, right? So network segmentation is a huge thing when you think about it within your organization, and what we always try to say is break it down to analyzing where your most critical assets are, right? I mean, people are willing to do it for their cardholder data environment. Why wouldn't you be willing to do it for an HR department, right? You don't have to do everything at once. But you need to analyze what's there. You need to look at your servers. You need to look at your assets, your corporate resources, what these users actually need to do. And you can even start just within IT, right? Just within your own department if you want, or your risk department, or whatever it is. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're segmenting those because, we're all going to get phished at some point. There's going to be an attack, something. But our goal is to prevent the proliferation of that malware as much as we can in order to detect it, right? That's the goal, is to stop it long enough that we recognize it if it gets past some of our other defenses. So you really need to look at what your organization's doing, where those critical assets are. Start small and start moving forward. As long as you're moving forward, that's all that matters. If you just look at it and go, screw it, it's too big, it's going to take me 10 years, I'm not going to do it, you'll never get anywhere. Don't be defeated up front. Every little bit does help.
So here's one that's like a big one with me is that all of the big organizations nowadays, I'll just name a few that I know for sure, like Boeing, GE, a couple other bigger organizations. Lockheed, they all have internal pen testing teams. And they pay internal pen tester salaries, right? And so I'm gonna try to talk about this and not sound grandiose, but the thing is that like the offensive red team type stuff is sexy and it's in high demand, right? And it's paid really, really well, right? A lot of times we're on the road all the time. There is a high price to pay. However, it's a really, really well paying salary. And so a lot of times, somebody, such as myself, might get an offer from an organization to come be on the blue team, which I'd love to do. I'd love to work somewhere and be on the defensive somewhere and not travel as much. However, the problem is it's not sexy to be on the blue team, right? Like it doesn't pay as well and it doesn't, have as many benefits. And so I'm shocked when I go into organizations and they don't have a pen tester on staff, right? Because there's no way that you're going to catch attackers without having an attacker on staff. And when I say a pen tester, I mean somebody that's actively in the offensive security community, right? Even though they might work in a blue team job. I'm not talking about, somebody that worked at Foundstone like 20 years ago or something like that. And like,
not that there's anything wrong
with that. But, that wasn't you. That was ISS, right? Oh, not you? Okay. Cool. We can talk bad about them then. No, I'm just kidding. So, but something like I really like to harp on with organizations, and the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times I go into places to do a pen test and they're like, dear God, how can we hire somebody like you to be on staff? Because you could literally write all our SIM and monitoring rules and have us fixed up in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, pay them a competitive salary. Like, I hate to make it all about money, but that's part of what it is. And so this has been talked a lot this year.
Yeah. So kind of where it came from for us is we were doing a pen test for an organization about 4 years ago. And their defenses were so bad, we owned their SOC. So we were on their SOC computers, and I would say, all right, Martin, you attack, and I'm going to defend. And we were actually red and blue teaming ourselves back and forth, trying to prevent each other from getting into these different systems. So we called ourselves a purple team at that point. But honestly, you need the best defenders are attackers, and the best attackers are defenders. If you know one side of the coin, the other side of the coin comes naturally as well. If I know how I'm going to attack an organization, me as a pen tester, even though I'm offensive, should have great recommendations and resolutions for this customer when the report comes out, because I can tell them exactly what I did and how to defend specifically against that. So one other big thing is you need to research your vendor.
You never know who you're going to get on a pen test, right? So it's really, and this isn't a pitch for my organization or like anybody else's organization, but what I'm saying is you've really got to do your homework. Like, you can't just hire somebody because they were on Fox News, right? You never know what they might be into. Right. So what I'm saying is spend some time to research your vendor, right? Something that I also always try to tell organizations to do is if you get with a vendor you trust, and you have a policy in place to switch vendors, which you should. I never ever recommend staying with the same pen test vendor very long, 2-3 years max, right? Ask that say we were working with you and you really trusted, where I work at Accuvant, right? And we did your test for a couple of years, and I was just talking about somebody with this earlier, and we did your test for a couple of years, and you said, all right, guys, I think you've, gone as far as you can go. I'm going to switch to another vendor next year. A bad company is going to get pissed off and take their toys and kick rocks and go home, right? A good company is going to say, you know what, that's an excellent idea, and here is 4 or 5 other companies that I really trust and know people that work at, right? And then they're going to go to one of those companies, and ultimately at some point they're probably going to come back to you. So it's really, really important. Another reason I like to talk about this, I'll tell a funny story. I try not to bust out the company, but we were at a pen test a few years ago, and we were doing their PCI, yearly penetration test, and the client was telling us that they had just lost their QSA and that they were looking for a new QSA to give them their rock. I mean, this company's huge, like worldwide, was going to give them their rock, and so they were in negotiations with another company that, is pretty well known, and they were trying to get them as the QSA, and the guy literally, called up this CISO that, that we were working for and said, you can just run down, they were telling them the importance of them getting their rock by like X day or something. And so the guys literally called up and they're like, oh, well, in that case, we just got this questionnaire we can run through all these questions on, and we'll give you your rock over the phone.
It's a large global company.
I mean, anyway, so that type of stuff happens out there in the world.
You're the thought leader. I got the next one for sure.
Okay. You also got to be careful of thought leaders. I mean, like I said, you just never know. There are thought leaders out there in the industry, and there are people that are on the news. I hate Fox News. This is CNN, but I like to pick on Fox News because I hate Fox News. However, what I do like is that I know that somebody that I know and trust that is saying the right thing, Dave Kennedy, is out there on Fox News telling them the right way to go. And so that's really, really important. And even though I joke about thought leaders all the time, I'm really, really thankful that that we're getting a lot more exposure in the security industry, and that we're able to get out there on the news and drive the right message and get all of these programs that we're talking about moving forward in a lot of organizations.
And next year we're going to be talking about chief storytellers. That's my role. So you can't protect what you don't know about, right? We kind of already touched on this. We did a pen test where, and I know we're running short on time, I'll try to be quick, but we did a pen test where I dropped like a pony or something, and we got a shell, and I got on a box. And first thing I always do is to look and see how many routes there are, what's going on with this box. And we always take whatever it is. Like if it's a /24, we always just go one above and do a /16. So I found a range like that. I hit these boxes, and I'm like, holy crap, there's these 10 boxes here. I checked them manually for MSO to 6.7, and they were all vulnerable. And we popped those boxes. We own the entire organization. So we went back to them, and they're like, those aren't our IP addresses. And we're like, well, I'm pretty sure they are, because we got the accounts off of them that helped us own the rest of the organization. So they said, well, we don't have it in our DNS. We don't have it in this, that, and the other thing. And what had happened was it was a plant that was over in Europe that they had closed down 4 years earlier, but no one knew what the servers did. So when they shut the plant down, they just closed the door and locked it and left them running. But the people back in the States had just removed them from DNS, right? They didn't do the active scanning and the repeat and all that stuff. So we really, really push for even just going out and letting us do host discovery in your network. Like I said, I will sit down with you for 6 months in the /8 and find everything that I can in your organization. And that's probably going to be more valuable to you because you have no idea what's there, what's not. And it's not something that's sexy, but it's something that's going to be very valuable to the organization. How can you defend what you don't know you have, right?
All right, so we are running out of time, but we're going to talk a little bit about, I'll blow through these last couple slides, but assessing your maturity model. Something that's really beneficial for this is the P-test. Anybody heard of the Penetration Testing Execution Standard? It's written by pen testers. Basically, it's sort of a checklist for pen testers and for organizations getting a pen test. And so I'll bring this up to every client that I work at where not only should you be checking to make sure that I did everything, as a pen test, as a client, you should be checking, all of your vendors and making sure that they're doing a proper penetration test. And it's all outlined in there. I was going to talk about it a little bit more, but we're short on time. But reading that, there's all kinds of things in there where you can assess the, security model of your organization. There's a lot of guidelines in there where you can decide if you have a low maturity model, a high maturity model. Is your, are you doing well? Where do you need some work?
And even, you should be able to at least take the high level bullet points from each phase, because I know it's a lot to digest, especially for the person looking at it for the first time. But even taking those high level and just going to your defenders and also to your third party that you're looking to contract with and ask if they do these things, and if so, ask them what their methodology is, because someone who does this constantly should be able to tell you exactly at the drop of a hat if you ask them about their methodology for internal or external. They should be able to tell you, and if they can't, then maybe move on to the next one.
So the P-test helps you making sure you get what you paid for, right? And so, if you're paying for a penetration test, you should get a penetration test. If you're paying for a vulnerability assessment, you should get a vulnerability assessment, because I feel bad when I go into organizations and they paid for a full scope penetration test, and, me and Eric walk in the front door, find MS-0867 in a plant running, that's 4 years old. That was like an 8-week assessment. We were literally done on day 2 because they didn't know what they needed.
So a lot of times we talk about the disconnect between all the different groups that exist, right? You got to make sure that, for us, it's, account managers that are selling our services, we need to educate them, make sure they understand the difference between a pen test and a vulnerability assessment, that they can show that value to the customer. When it's internal, it's things like your processes in place to have proper notifications, help desk people know what their role is, but they also know what everybody else's role is within the organization when something's going on. And there's always kind of a huge disconnect between all the groups associated with it, right? We're all silos. Like, we're red teamers, so screw you blue team guys, we're against you, right? Like, that all kind of has to go away at this point. We need to intermingle, I guess.
All right, so here's some things that you should be getting out of a penetration test, right? These are some of the takeaways that you should be walking away with after the test is done. And, understanding the risks and threats that you can feed back into how you design and develop network applications, right? So this is you taking my report of the path of least resistance and integrating that into your security program. Understanding the process of attack for your particular company. That's not just reading my report and saying, oh, snap, you got domain admin, right? It's understanding every single level of how I got there. And not a lot of organizations go into that much detail. I can only put so much in a report and so many screenshots, right? Sometimes we need to review, in words, like how to go over, like, how did you do that? Or why did that happen? Or why did you do that? So, vulnerabilities account for the environment, network architecture, or asset value. You should be getting, vulnerability pictures out of this. Try to hurry up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that last one, smart people can find issues that were never even thought of by the organization, right? Once you bring in somebody with a different mindset, I mean, even from the same pen test company, we go in behind each other sometimes, or we'll go in behind somebody else, and it's a completely different pen test for the customer than it was the year before. But having all those different looks at your organization can help you understand better, but also make your defenses better.
And we do that a lot. You know, we always try to send the clients that we do multiple pen tests for year after year after year, we always try to send a different consultant every time, because even though, you know, I may not have found everything, right? My path of least resistance might have been different than somebody else's path of least resistance. So even with the same company or vendor, you can get a different test every year. But if you get the same, like Billy Bob out there every year because he takes you out for drinks and spends a lot of money on you, I mean, like, you're not getting what you should be getting. All right, so thanks, everyone. Does anybody have any questions?
We're hiring, by the way. Come see me.
So I'll be honest, in the past 4 years, me and Eric have only found one company that we think has it all the way together. I wish I could say their name, but unfortunately I can't, because they should get the biggest gold star. But just to give you an idea, like, I went there 2 years ago and I spent 4 weeks on site, and they literally handed me one of their computers and said, pretend like you stole this. Do anything you can possibly think of. There's no rules whatsoever. And I got Zippo. And Eric went back this year, and they basically told him the same thing, and Eric got Zippo. Now, that's the high end of the spectrum, right? So, but there are some organizations that are doing some things, you know, to move forward along that path. The biggest one that I see is network segmentation, right? If I can't get to it, then I can't penetrate it, right? So network segmentation is one of the biggest, and unfortunately that's one of the biggest undertakings. But, you know, currently, like this year, the whole responder NetBIOS thing is really popular, and like everybody's just rolling in, using the NetBIOS attack, passing around some credentials, getting domain admin, and it's game over on day one. And then when we suggest to the client disabling NetBIOS, they're like, oh my God, we got all these like applications that need it, and like they just don't even know what to do, right? Like, it's a disaster, like, because they couldn't even conceive of turning off NetBIOS. But the companies where we've pen tested and they've actually taken our remediation, there's several that I've been back to this year that have completely disabled NetBIOS, LLMNR, you know, all that type of stuff over the network. So those type of things are working. It's a pain in the ass, but individual passwords for every local admin account.
Disable W digest. There's a KB for it.
Yeah, disabling W digest. It's basically getting the organizations that I see that are mitigating their Windows environment are organizations that got a pen test from a good company where they actually used all of the Windows features to escalate through the environment. They paid attention to the report, and they went through one by one, you know. I mean, and it's a long process, right? It's not like you can just turn off NetBIOS in your organization. You got to do it over here. You got to test it. You got to make sure. But for the people that say, I got all these legacy applications, I'm like, cool, that's where network segmentation comes in, right? Let's put those applications way over here and disable NetBIOS on everything else. There's a lot of solutions, but, you know, it's only companies that pay attention and mitigate them. But mitigating Windows features is pretty much the most important thing, I think.
And I would like to say one thing about that company, because unfortunately the guys who run it probably will never get the kudos they deserve. But everything they did with free tools that already existed. BitLocker, AppLocker, two guys. And it's not a huge multinational company, but it's enough for us to use as a measuring stick and say, you say you can't do this, but these guys did it and it scales for them. It can be done. And the other thing that I wanted to say about those guys was, you know, very humble, great guys that were just able to really take something and get buy-in from the higher ups. And that's important, right? If you don't have that buy-in and that understanding and that trust, you're never going to get it, make it happen. But it was just an incredible experience, honestly. Even though it was a complete and utter failure on my part, it taught me a lot of things that people just can't say, I can't do that anymore.
It was the one time we were happy to fail. Any more questions? Yes. So the question is, out of all the pen tests that I do, how many companies really need a pen test? I'd probably say 3/4 of them were not ready for me to come. At least 75%. I wouldn't have considered ready. That's just my opinion, of course. I mean, but like I said, of those 75% of the companies, I would say that they had a fairly simple vulnerability that I didn't have to work for. And that was fairly well known and should have been caught by a blue team and probably just wasn't because they didn't know about it, right? The thing is that I'll wake up every morning and I'm reading, exploit database and I'm looking for the newest, I'm on mailing lists and so I'm on the cutting, edge of what's happening every day publicly, right?
He's a thought leader. He has to be.
But I guess what I'm saying is that if I was in a blue team defensive position, I would slack up on that kind of stuff because it wouldn't be as important to me because I wouldn't be using it every day on the offensive. And so what happens is that at some point your blue team just doesn't know and they're not in the know anymore, right? So that happens. So I definitely say at least 75% could have benefited from some other type of assessment first.
Dr. Street.
That was neither one of us.
Neither one.
That was neither one of us. We didn't get shit.
No, we got to drive Ferraris.
We did get to drive Ferraris. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I mean, it depends, right? So when we go into a pen test, we know within about 5 minutes after talking to the customer if they're really serious about what we're about to do and undertake. And we have great people that we do consult with who are really excited to have us in there. They know we're going to bring value and they fix shit. I can tell you, on all my repeat customers, only one out of probably 500 or 600 actually stand out as every year they're getting better. And again, it's a lot of times I don't get to repeat, but we get to see the reports. But I can think of more where I did a 3-year assessment on where I own them every single year on the same system with the same vulnerability, and it's been reported all times. That's more common, I think, than people actually remediating stuff. Or they've remediated the super low stuff like, hey, we don't have SSL v2 anymore, or something where the CEO read in some magazine that this had to be fixed kind of thing. But for the most part, no, it's usually, that's the first thing we do when we go back in is we look and see if those are there. I'd say 9 times out of 10 they are.
And it's interesting that you say that because that falls in line sort of with what we're talking about is that when that happens, when I go into an organization, they're like, yeah, you know what, we just didn't really fix anything. And I'm like, no shit, I can tell. Then what I like to do is say, you basically weren't ready for a second-year pen test. So let's back up and figure out why you didn't get this stuff remediated, right? And so, because most of the time it's not the dude's fault. He probably opened a ticket or emailed somebody or did whatever he was supposed to do for his process. But then there was a breakdown in the process. The ticket didn't get approved. The Linux guys said it was bullshit and I never talked to him or whatever. So I like to go back and back up and say, hey, why don't we use this time to go over where the breakdown in your remediation process is and see if we can identify that and help fix it rather than wasting another $50K on a pen test or whatever.
And if we really feel like they're interested and up front, we will always ask them to, if I find something, or if, here's this specific vulnerability, here's what I can do with it. How would you like me to write it up, right? Because I want to make sure that they get to fix it, right? In the end, our job is to help make their job easier, right? And defend that organization. So a lot of times we will say, you wanted it bloody, that's great. Here we go. We called your baby ugly. What's the best way to get this across and documented for you so that you can actually take it and make it actionable on the back end. All right, I think we're out of time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for sticking around.
Do you want to stay behind the thing, or do you want to stay back here?
We use a lot of Windows. They triggered on anything that a non-user, and if you type in SCH task, you were like trying to get the answer, they would get an alert. If you type in PowerShell and they would get an alert. You type in remediation and answer, they would get an alert. They would really do it. Okay, yeah, figures and y'all probably using command that you're already right out.